It was a Thursday night, one of those rainy ones that feels like the world's whispering secrets behind the drops. I remember it vividly because it was the night I realized nothing would ever be the same. Jessica had left the house earlier, dressed in her usual black dress. Except this time, it didn't feel usual at all. The air between us had been different for weeks, tight like a noose. She didn't even bother to give me her typical half-hearted goodbye. Just grabbed her purse, threw her jacket over her shoulder, and said, "Don't wait up. It's a late night with the girls." Something about that tone, so casual but almost rehearsed, like she had practiced it to sound just right. I didn't say anything, but a knot formed in my stomach. Call it instinct, or maybe just the years you spend knowing someone inside and out. I didn't have proof of anything yet, but I knew something was wrong. Hell, even the way her heels tapped down the hallway felt like she was leaving something behind. I sat in the living room, the TV on but not really watching. My mind kept circling back to her, wondering where she actually was. At one point, I picked up my phone and texted her, "Have fun tonight." No reply. Hours went by, and I waited. By midnight, I couldn't sit still anymore. My gut told me to check her location. It's not something I ever did before. Trust was something I thought we had down. But when I opened the app, my heart nearly jumped out of my chest. She was nowhere near where she said she'd be. In fact, she was on the other side of town, parked at some address I didn't recognize. I sat there staring at the little dot on the map, the seconds feeling like hours. Maybe she went to grab something on her way home? Maybe she's at some after party? My brain threw me excuses, trying to make sense of it, but my hands had already started shaking. I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed my keys and got in the car. The drive was a blur of headlights, wet streets, and a growing sense of dread. My heart was racing, and part of me hoped I'd get there and find out I was overreacting. Just a stupid misunderstanding. But another part of me, one I didn't want to admit existed, knew exactly what was coming. When I finally arrived at the address, it was some random apartment building. Not her friend's place, not anywhere I'd ever been before. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the night was eerily quiet. I parked a little down the street and just sat there, staring at the building like it would somehow reveal the truth without me having to go in. But then I saw her, walking out of the building. Her hair was messed up, makeup smudged slightly in a way that wasn't from just a night out with friends. She didn't see me at first, but when she turned towards her car, I caught a glimpse of her face. She was smiling. Not just any smile, a satisfied one. The kind of smile someone wears when they think they've gotten away with something. My stomach dropped. I couldn't sit there any longer. Without thinking, I got out of the car and slammed the door behind me, the sound cutting through the quiet street like a gunshot. She turned sharply, her eyes locking with mine. For a split second, the smile vanished, replaced by something I hadn't seen in her before. Panic. "Tom? What the hell are you doing here?" She stammered, her voice shaking slightly. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rage building up inside me. "That's what I should be asking you, Jessica. What the hell are you doing here?" She looked around, like she was trying to find an exit, an escape route, but there was none. The game was over and we both knew it. "Tom, it's not what it looks like," she said, her voice dropping into that familiar, manipulative tone she used whenever she was cornered. But it was what she said next that made my blood boil. It was just harmless fun. A one-time thing. It doesn't mean anything. I felt my whole body tense up as if her words punched me in the gut. Harmless fun? A one-time thing? She looked at me like I was supposed to just nod and agree, like her betrayal could be dismissed with a few empty words. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, the rain now picking up again, soaking through my clothes. She stared at me, waiting for me to say something, probably expecting me to lose it, scream, throw a fit. But the only thing that came out of my mouth was something I never thought I'd hear myself say. "You think a night with another man is just harmless?" She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand to stop her. My voice was calm, but inside I felt like I was about to explode. "You come home tonight and you'll find our marriage certificate torn up. Understand?" Her eyes widened, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I turned around, got back in my car, and drove off, leaving her standing there in the rain. The rest of the night, I barely slept. The house felt colder, emptier than ever before. Everything was about to change, and I was the only one who saw it coming. I barely remember the drive home. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and the streetlights blurred into a mess of light and shadows. My mind kept replaying that moment outside the apartment. The look on Jessica's face when she realized she'd been caught. That smug confidence crumbling in real time. But even more than her panicked expression, it was her words that kept stabbing at me like knives. Harmless fun. That's what she called it. A night with another man, sneaking around behind my back, and she had the nerve to look me in the eye and say it was no big deal, as if it didn't just rip apart everything we had. I gritted my teeth, trying to push away the rage building inside, but it was useless. The fury was there to stay. By the time I got home, I wasn't thinking straight. I stormed into the house, the door slamming shut behind me with a force that rattled the walls. Our place looked exactly the same as it did when I left earlier that night, but it felt foreign now. It was like walking into a stranger's home. Every photo, every piece of furniture, even the damn scent of her perfume lingering in the air, felt like a lie. I couldn't stand it. I grabbed the first thing that symbolized us together, our wedding photo from the living room shelf. In the picture, she's smiling at me like I'm the only person in the world, her eyes bright with love, or what I thought was love. My stomach twisted at the sight of it. The frame slipped from my fingers and hit the floor, the glass shattering into jagged pieces, just like everything else. I wasn't done. I stormed into the study, yanked open the drawer where we kept our important documents, and there it was, our marriage certificate. The official paper that meant something once. The symbol of a promise, a commitment. I held it in my hands, trembling with anger. Before I knew what I was doing, I ripped it straight down the middle. The sound of paper tearing was so satisfying and so final. I kept going, tearing it into smaller and smaller pieces, until it was nothing but confetti on the floor. The house was eerily silent except for my heavy breathing. I stood there for what felt like hours, just staring at the shredded certificate at my feet, my mind racing but blank at the same time. She didn't deserve that piece of paper. She didn't deserve the promises we made or the life we built together. And if she thought she could walk back in here and act like this was all some silly misunderstanding, she was in for a rude awakening. I paced around the living room, running my hands through my hair, trying to calm the storm in my head. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. How long had this been going on? Was this really just a one-time thing, or had she been sneaking around for months, years even? Every late night, every work trip, every text she dismissed as just the girls. All of it felt tainted now. By 3 a.m., I'd lost count of how many times I replayed the night in my head. I kept expecting to wake up, hoping this was some sick nightmare, but it wasn't. And the worst part? I didn't even know if I wanted to confront her again. Not yet. I needed more. I reached for her laptop, sitting open on the kitchen counter. She usually kept it locked, but tonight of all nights, she'd left it wide open. Like she didn't expect me to notice. Like she had gotten too comfortable in her lies. My hands hovered over the keyboard, and I hesitated for a split second. I'd never invaded her privacy before. Not once. But the Jessica I thought I knew had just shattered everything. The messages were easy to find. Too easy. Her browser was still open to her email, and there it was, his name. Matt. A string of messages, casual at first, then flirty. Then, as I scrolled down, more explicit. Every word felt like a punch to the gut. There were photos too. Photos of them together, laughing in a way I hadn't seen her laugh in years. Then one of her, in that same black dress she'd worn tonight, standing outside some bar, leaning into him like he was the center of her universe. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest tightening. It was one thing to suspect, but to see it laid out in front of me like that, it was a different kind of pain, a kind that crawls under your skin and festers. And just as I sat there, staring at the closed laptop, I heard the front door creak open. Jessica was home. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor, echoing through the silence. She didn't know yet. She had no idea what she was walking into. I didn't move, just sat there, waiting for her to come face to face with the wreckage she'd caused. When she stepped into the living room and saw me sitting there, her eyes went wide, but not with guilt or shame. No, it was that same mask of control she always wore, like she could talk her way out of anything. But she didn't notice the shredded marriage certificate at first. Not until she stepped on one of the torn pieces. Her gaze followed the trail of paper, and then her eyes met mine. I waited for her to say something, to explain, to beg for forgiveness, anything. Instead, she crossed her arms, and with that same calm, icy tone she used earlier, she said, "What's your problem, Tom?" My problem took everything in me not to explode right there. Her voice, so casual, so cold. It was the final spark. The one that lit the whole damn thing on fire. "What's my problem?" I repeated, standing up slowly. The rage was clawing its way up my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm, at least for now. "You really want to know, Jessica? You think we're just going to stand here and have a little chat like nothing's happened?" She rolled her eyes, the ultimate sign of her indifference, and dropped her purse on the floor. "Tom, I'm tired. Can we do this in the morning? I don't have the energy for whatever. This is right now." I took a step forward, and the sound of crunching paper under my feet caught her attention again. Her eyes darted down to the torn-up marriage certificate scattered across the floor, finally registering the damage. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in her expression. Not fear, but irritation. "What the hell did you do?" she asked, her voice sharp now, more annoyed than anything. She stepped closer, kicking a piece of the certificate aside with her shoe, like it was just trash in her way. "I'm done playing this game, Jessica," I said, my voice low, controlled, but barely. "I know everything. I saw the messages. I know about Matt. I know about tonight. All of it." Her reaction wasn't what I expected. "No choque, no horror, no tears." She just sighed, like I'd caught her in some small, inconvenient lie, like I was the one overreacting. "Tom, I already told you. It was just a stupid night. One time. You're really going to tear up our marriage certificate over something that meant nothing?" She laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh I remembered from when we were happy. It was bitter, empty. "God, you're being so dramatic." Couldn't believe it. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even pretending to be. Dramatic. My voice rose, and I could feel the anger bubbling over. "You think this is me being dramatic? You lied to me, Jessica. You cheated. You've been sneaking around with some guy, and you have the audacity to stand here and act like it's no big deal." She shrugged, like I'd accused her of leaving the dishes out, not blowing up our entire marriage. "I don't know what you want me to say, Tom. It's not like I planned this. It just happened. Things between us haven't exactly been great for a while, and you know that." I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. "You're seriously trying to blame me for this?" "I'm not blaming anyone," she said, her voice so calm it made my skin crawl. "I'm just saying maybe if you paid a little more attention to me, we wouldn't be in this situation." That's when it hit me. She didn't feel guilty. She didn't feel anything. She was spinning it, twisting it around, making this my fault. Her cheating was somehow my failure, my lack of attention, my fault for not being enough. She had the nerve to stand there, looking me in the eye, and tell me I should have done more while she was out screwing around with someone else. For a second, I thought about shouting, about yelling at the top of my lungs, telling her exactly what I thought of her, of everything she'd done. But the rage inside me shifted. It wasn't burning anymore. It was cold, sharp, and clear. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to argue. It was over. "You know what, Jessica? You're right," I said quietly, and the calmness in my own voice surprised me. "I haven't been paying attention. Not enough, anyway. But I'm wide awake now." She looked at me, confused for a second, her mouth opening slightly, as if she wasn't sure what to expect next. "Tom, what? You thought a night with another man was harmless fun?" I cut her off, my voice hard as steel. "Fine, you had your fun, but you just lost me. You lost this marriage." Her eyes widened, and she finally started to understand that this wasn't going to be the conversation she thought she could control. "Wait, Tom, don't be like that. You're blowing this way out of proportion. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "It meant everything. Every lie you told. Every time you made me feel like I was crazy for doubting you, for not trusting you. It meant something, all right? And I'm done pretending it didn't. For the first time that night, I saw her mask crack. The confidence, the cold indifference. It slipped for just a second, replaced by a flash of panic. She took a step closer, her hands reaching out, but I moved back. Tom, wait, let's just talk about this. We can work through it, I promise. It was a mistake. I didn't want to hurt you. I shook my head slowly, feeling the weight of every moment of this disaster pressing down on me. You didn't want to hurt me? Jessica, you didn't care enough about me to even think about hurting me. You made your choice the second you walked into that guy's place tonight. Her lips parted, like she was going to say something else, but she didn't. For once, she had no words. And in that silence, I realized it didn't matter anymore. The Jessica I had loved, the woman I had married, wasn't standing in front of me. She hadn't been for a long time. I turned my back to her, heading toward the hallway. I'll be gone by morning. This marriage is over. Tom, stop, she shouted. Her voice desperate now, no longer controlled. She was scrambling, trying to regain her grip, but it was too late. Where are you going? You can't just leave. We're married. You don't get to walk away like this. I paused at the doorway, turning to look at her one last time. You tore up this marriage long before I did, Jess. I'm just cleaning up the mess. And with that, I left her standing there, surrounded by the pieces of our broken life. I didn't leave that night. Not right away, at least. As I walked into the hallway, something inside me, maybe some twisted sense of closure, wanted to see how she would react when she thought I wasn't looking. I stood there, just out of her sight, leaning against the wall. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I forced myself to stay still, listening. First, there was silence. Then, I heard her muttering to herself. She wasn't crying, not even close. Her voice was low, angry, annoyed. Unbelievable, she hissed. All this over nothing. Nothing. The word hit me like a punch. To her, it was nothing. Not the cheating, not the lies, not the broken promises. It was all just nothing. I could feel my hands clenching into fists, my nails digging into my palms. But I waited. I wanted to see what she would do next. I heard her pick up her phone. My blood ran cold. She wasn't calling me to apologize. No, not even close. She called him Matt. Her voice softened, shifting from irritation to something more intimate, sickeningly sweet. Yeah, it's me. No, he found out. She laughed. Actually laughed. Like this whole thing was some kind of joke. Yeah, he went all dramatic on me, threatened to leave. Can you believe that? My jaw tightened. I had never hated her more than I did in that moment. The way she talked about me like I was some kind of fool, like I was overreacting to her betrayal. The fact that she could be so calm, so indifferent, after everything, it was beyond anything I could have imagined. She kept talking. Don't worry, it'll blow over. I'll handle him. He's not going anywhere. He's too soft to actually leave. Trust me, he'll be back by morning. He's just throwing a tantrum. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped back into the living room, the floor creaking under my feet. Her head whipped around, her face draining of color as she saw me standing there, staring at her. Her phone was still pressed to her ear, but she was frozen, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Hang up the phone, Jessica, I said, my voice deathly quiet. She didn't move. Her hand stayed glued to the phone, like maybe she could still salvage this, still control the situation. But the mask had slipped entirely, and I wasn't playing along anymore. I said hang up. She scrambled to end the call, fumbling with the screen before finally lowering the phone, her hands shaking slightly. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand. Don't, I warned, my voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. I heard everything. She swallowed, her eyes flickering with panic. Tom, you what? I interrupted, stepping closer. You're going to lie again? Tell me how this was all just some big misunderstanding? That I'm overreacting? That I'm the problem? Her mouth snapped shut, but I could see the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out her next move. For once, she had no script, no clever words to manipulate me. She'd always been good at that, twisting things around until I questioned my own reality. But not this time. This time I saw everything clearly. I was standing right here, I continued, my voice dangerously low. I heard you talking to him. I heard you laugh about it. You think this is some game? You think I'm a joke?" Her eyes darted to the side, like she was searching for an escape, but there was nowhere to go. Not this time. She finally met my gaze again, her voice barely a whisper. "Tom, I didn't mean it like that." I shook my head, cutting her off again. "You meant every word. Don't insult me by pretending you didn't. You really think I'm too soft to leave? That I'll come crawling back to you after everything you've done?" For the first time, I saw fear flicker in her eyes. Real fear. She knew she had pushed too far, crossed a line she couldn't step back from. But I wasn't finished. "You were never going to tell me the truth, were you?" I said, my voice steady now, the anger turning into something colder. "You were just going to keep lying, keep pretending everything was fine, while you kept running around behind my back." She started to shake her head, but I stopped her with a look. "And even now, when you're caught red-handed, you still don't care. You're not sorry. You're not even remotely sorry. You're just sorry you got caught." Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I could see her searching for a way to spin this, to salvage some control over the situation. But there was nothing left to say. Nothing she could say would make any of this better. "I was ready to leave tonight," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But now, I'm gonna make this harder for you, Jess. Much harder than you ever imagined." Her eyes flashed with something. Panic, fear, maybe anger. But she stayed silent, watching me, waiting for whatever was coming next. "I'm not just walking out and giving you what you want," I continued, stepping closer until I was right in front of her. "You're going to feel the consequences of what you've done. You're going to watch everything fall apart, and this time you won't be able to manipulate your way out of it." She took a shaky step back, her confidence shattered. "Tom, wait, we can talk about this." I smiled, but it wasn't the kind of smile she'd seen from me before. It was cold, final. "We're done talking, Jessica. This is the last conversation we'll ever have." And with that, I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her standing there, finally realizing just how badly she had lost control. Outside, the rain had started up again, but this time, I welcomed it. The cold air hit me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, or how exactly I was going to make her feel the weight of her choices. But I knew one thing for sure: this wasn't over. The rain fell harder as I walked to my car, each drop soaking through my clothes, but I didn't care. The coldness outside matched the storm raging inside me. I wasn't thinking about where I was going, just that I needed to get away from her, away from that house that had become a stage for her lies. But even as I drove, the image of Jessica standing there, her face finally crumbling under the weight of the truth, played over and over in my head. She thought she could just smooth things over with a few lies and a fake apology. But not this time. This time, I was going to make sure she felt the full weight of her betrayal. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, the rain streaking down the windshield, blurring the neon lights outside. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. The adrenaline was still pumping, but beneath that, something else was growing. Plan. An idea. She thought she had one. She thought her little mistake would just fade away, that I'd be too weak, too soft to fight back. But I wasn't going to let her walk away from this unscathed. I was going to make sure that everything she valued, everything she thought she could protect with her lies, was torn apart, just like she'd torn up our marriage. I pulled out my phone. My first instinct was to call my best friend, Mike, someone who'd been there for me through thick and thin. He didn't know what was happening yet, but I needed someone on my side, someone who would have my back no matter what. The phone rang twice before his groggy voice came through. "Tom? Dude, it's like 4 a.m. What's going on?" I leaned back in the car seat, staring up at the rain-soaked roof of the gas station. "Mike, I need your help, and I need it now." His voice immediately sharpened with concern. "What happened? Are you okay?" "No," I said bluntly. "Jessica's been cheating on me. I found out tonight." There was a pause, then a low whistle on the other end. "Man, I'm so sorry. I knew things were rough between you two, but I didn't think, damn, what do you need from me?" I clenched my jaw, focusing on the next step. "I need to get my stuff out of the house before she tries to twist this against me." and I need to figure out how to make sure she doesn't screw me over in the divorce. Mike didn't hesitate. I've got your back, man. I'll be over there in an hour. Don't do anything stupid before I get there. All right? I hung up, feeling a small sense of relief knowing Mike was in my corner. But there was more to be done. I wasn't going to let this just be a messy breakup. I was going to hit her where it hurt the most. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't wanted to use until now. Ben. My lawyer. I hadn't thought I'd ever need him for something like this. But life has a funny way of kicking you in the gut when you least expect it. It rang once before he answered, groggy but polite. Tom? What's going on? Ben, I need your expertise on something. I took a deep breath. Jessica's been unfaithful. I'm filing for divorce. There was a brief pause, but no surprise in his voice when he spoke again. All right, first things first, don't leave the house permanently yet. If you walk out, she could claim abandonment. You stay on the property, at least for now, until we can sort this out. I nodded to myself, the legal side of things snapping into place. I'm not letting her spin this. She's gonna try to paint me as the bad guy, but I need to make sure I have control. I want to know my options, how to make sure I don't lose everything in this. Ben's tone was calm, professional. We'll make sure she can't. But first, I need you to gather evidence. Texts, emails, anything that proves the affair. We'll build your case around it. The courts take infidelity seriously. Tom, you have a good chance of making sure you come out of this with what's fair. But we need to be smart. I rubbed my temples, the weight of everything starting to settle in. I hadn't thought of the courts, the paperwork, the legal mess this was going to become. But I was ready to fight. All right, I said. I'll do what I need to do. I hung up and sat in silence for a moment, my breath fogging up the inside of the car. The rain was still coming down hard, but it didn't feel chaotic anymore. It felt cleansing, like it was washing away the confusion, the anger, and leaving behind a clarity I hadn't had in years. I knew what I had to do next. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. If Jessica thought she could manipulate me, she was wrong. She might have been able to lie to my face and get away with it for a while, but not anymore. Now, every step I took was calculated. I was going to play this smarter than she ever could. When I pulled up to the driveway, the house was dark. She had gone to bed, as if nothing had happened. I felt a wave of disgust at how easily she could shut off her emotions. But no matter. By morning, she'd wake up to a whole new reality. I quietly entered the house, careful not to wake her. I wasn't planning to argue anymore. There was no point. Instead, I grabbed a few essentials and made my way to the guest room at the far end of the house. The door clicked shut behind me, separating me from her for what would be one of the last times. The guest room felt different than the rest of the house. It was cold, unfamiliar, like a place I'd never belonged. But I was okay with that. This was temporary. I was just setting the pieces in place. Before I went to sleep, I pulled out my phone and looked at Jessica's messages again. The ones with Matt. The way she talked to him, laughed with him, shared things she hadn't shared with me in years. I took screenshots of everything. Every disgusting detail, every damning word. I wasn't going to let her slip away from this untouched. As I lay down, the weight of the night pressing against me, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of calm. The storm wasn't over, but I wasn't in the middle of it anymore. I was steering it now, and Jessica had no idea what was coming. By tomorrow, the reckoning would begin. And this time, I'd be ready that I woke up to the dull sound of rain still pattering against the windows. The guest room felt like a foreign place. Cold, unfamiliar, and yet somehow comforting in its distance from Jessica. I hadn't slept much, but the adrenaline had kept me going through the night. Now, as I stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything hit me again. But this time, I wasn't drowning in it. I felt clear-headed, laser-focused. I could hear faint movements from the other side of the house. Jessica was up. It was only a matter of time before she came looking for me. I had already made up my mind to stay calm, collected. I wasn't going to let her emotions dictate how this played out. I sat up and reached for my phone. The screenshots I'd taken of her messages with Matt were still open. I scrolled through them one more time, just to remind myself why I couldn't back down. Why this wasn't just some fight that could be smoothed over with empty apologies. It was deeper than that. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. There was a knock on the door. "Tom." Her voice was cautious, like she was testing the waters. "Are you in there?" I stayed silent for a moment, letting her wait. I wanted her to feel the weight of that door between us. Finally, I stood up and opened it. There she was, standing in the hallway, her hair still damp from a quick shower, makeup hastily applied. She looked like she was trying to reset the scene, as if looking put together would somehow change what had happened. Her eyes scanned me, trying to read my expression, but I gave her nothing. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice soft, almost pleading. It was a tone I hadn't heard in a long time. The Jessica I knew had always been in control, sharp, sometimes even cold. But now she was teetering. I could see it. I didn't move from the doorway. "Talk." She fidgeted with the edge of her shirt, looking down before meeting my eyes again. "Tom, I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand. I was upset, and I said things I shouldn't have." I raised an eyebrow, waiting for more, but she didn't go into specifics. She was fishing for sympathy, trying to gloss over the details, hoping I'd let her off easy. I wasn't biting. "That's it?" I asked, my voice steady. "That's your apology?" She blinked, caught off guard. I know I messed up. I know it was wrong. But you didn't have to tear up the marriage certificate, Tom. You didn't have to." I cut her off, my patience thinning. "You think that was the problem? That I tore up some piece of paper? You think that's why we're here?" She bit her lip, the frustration starting to break through her calm facade. "I made a mistake, okay? I admitted that. But you're acting like this is the end of the world. It was just one night. Stop," I said, my voice louder than I intended. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to keep control. "Just one night? Jessica, it's not about the night. It's about the lies. It's about you sneaking around behind my back and treating me like a fool." She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. "You think I didn't hear you last night? On the phone with him, laughing, saying I'd come crawling back, like I'm some kind of joke to you." Her eyes widened, and for a second, I saw real fear flash across her face. She hadn't expected me to hear that conversation. She thought she could control the narrative like she always had. She started, but I held up my hand. "No more excuses, Jess. I've had enough. You spent months, maybe longer, lying to my face, pretending everything was fine while you were with him." I shook my head, my voice hardening. "And then you stand here and tell me it's no big deal, that I'm overreacting." She took a step closer, her voice shaking now. "Tom, please. I didn't want to hurt you. I don't know what I was thinking. It just happened. But we can fix this. We can go to therapy, we can talk." I laughed bitterly. "Therapy? You think therapy's going to fix what you did? This isn't something you can just talk your way out of, Jessica. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." She was desperate now. I could see the cracks in her armor widening, her control slipping through her fingers. "Please, Tom. I know I messed up, but we've been together for so long. Don't throw everything away over this." I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice, making sure every word hit its mark. "You threw it away the second you chose him over us." For the first time, she didn't have a response. Her eyes filled with tears, and she looked away, like she couldn't bear to meet my gaze anymore. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us, the finality of it sinking in. I could have walked away then. I could have left her standing there, wallowing in her regret. But there was one more thing I needed her to understand. "I'm not just leaving, Jessica," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm going to make sure you feel every single consequence of this. You're not going to walk away from this unscathed. I've already talked to my lawyer. This is happening." Her head snapped up, panic flooding her face. "Wait, your lawyer? Tom, no. You don't have to do this. We can work it out. Please, just give me a chance." I shook my head. "You had your chance. You had 1,000 chances, but you chose to betray me. I'm done giving you more." She reached out to touch my arm, but I stepped back, her hand falling uselessly to her side. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," she whispered, her voice cracking. "We can figure it out without lawyers, without destroying everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in a long time. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the same person I had married. Maybe she never had been. And as much as it hurt, I realized I didn't care anymore. The love I had for her had been chipped away, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. "This is already destroyed," I said, my voice cold. "And you did that, Jess. Not me." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the doorway, her tears finally spilling over. But I didn't stop. Couldn't. This wasn't about saving what was already broken. This was about finally putting an end to it. The rain had stopped by the time I got outside, but the air was thick with the aftermath of the storm. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, feeling the weight of everything slowly lifting off my shoulders. I wasn't free yet, but I was getting closer. As I drove away, my phone buzzed on the passenger seat. A message from Mike. "I'm outside, ready to help whenever you are." I smiled to myself, feeling the first real sense of relief I'd had in what felt like years. The reckoning had started. By the time I pulled up to the house again, Mike was already there, leaning against his car, arms crossed. His face was set in a hard line, no jokes or half-smiles this time. He knew how serious this was. He gave me a nod as I got out of the car, but he didn't say anything right away. He didn't need to. He could read everything on my face. "How bad is it?" he finally asked, his voice low, as if not to disturb the calm before the next storm. "Worse than I thought," I replied, leaning against the hood of my car. I took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "She's been cheating with some guy for who knows how long. I found out last night. Caught her coming out of his place." Mike let out a long breath, shaking his head. "Man, I'm sorry. I can't imagine what that must have been like. What do you want to do now?" I looked at him, feeling that cold, calculated clarity I'd had all night settling back in. "I'm not letting her get away with this. I've already talked to Ben. I'm filing for divorce, but I'm staying in the house for now. She's going to try to make this ugly, and I'm not giving her a head start." Mike nodded, his eyes hard. "Good. You're right to stay. Don't give her any room to twist this on you." I pushed off the car, feeling that familiar burn of adrenaline in my veins. "I need to grab my stuff, set up in the guest room for a while until this all gets sorted out. I don't want to be around her, but I also don't want her spinning some story about me abandoning her." Mike straightened up. "I've got your back. Let's get this done." We headed inside, and as soon as the door closed behind us, the air felt thick. Jessica wasn't in sight, but I knew she was still in the house. I could feel her presence like a shadow lurking in the corners, watching, waiting. "Let's move quick," I muttered to Mike. We walked straight to the bedroom, the one I'd shared with Jessica for years. Now, it felt like enemy territory. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started packing my clothes. Mike stood by the door, his eyes scanning the room like he was on guard duty, making sure she didn't sneak up on us. It was ridiculous how tense it felt, but this was the new reality. The woman I had loved, trusted, was now someone I had to outsmart, outmaneuver. As I packed, I couldn't help but glance around the room. It was full of memories. Photos, little trinkets we'd collected over the years, reminders of trips we'd taken together. They all felt hollow now, like artifacts from a life that no longer existed. "Are you taking this stuff?" Mike asked, pointing to a photo of the two of us from our honeymoon, back when we were all smiles and promises. I shook my head, barely able to look at it. "Nah, let her have it. It's meaningless now." As we were finishing up, the door creaked open. Jessica stood there, her face pale, eyes red like she'd been crying, but still defiant. The way she looked at me, like I was the one tearing everything apart, made my blood boil. "You're really going through with this, aren't you?" she asked, her voice shaky but laced with accusation. "You're just going to walk away from everything we've built?" I zipped up the duffel bag with a sharp motion, refusing to look at her. "I'm not walking away. I'm making sure I don't get dragged down with you." Her eyes flashed with anger. "This is all because of one mistake? You're going to throw away our entire marriage over one stupid night." "One night?" I snapped, finally turning to face her. "Jessica, this wasn't one night. You've been lying to me for God knows how long. And the way you laughed about it with him like it was some game, you don't get to stand there and act like I'm the one ruining everything." Mike stepped forward, sensing things were escalating, but I held up my hand. This was my fight. She crossed her arms, her lip trembling. I already told you, Tom. It didn't mean anything. I love you, not him. Can't we just fix this? I stared at her, the woman I'd thought I'd spend my life with, and felt nothing but a cold, distant anger. Her words meant nothing now. Her love, her apologies were worthless. She was trying to play the part of the hurt wife, trying to reel me back in with the same old script. But I wasn't falling for it. No, Jess, we can't fix this. You can't fix this, I said, my voice steady final. I'm filing for divorce. It's over. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she was going to cry. But then, just as quickly, her expression shifted. That mask of coldness slid back into place, her defenses rising again. Fine, she said, her voice flat, emotionless. Do what you have to do. But don't think this is going to be easy for you. You want a war, Tom? You'll get one. There it was. The real Jessica. The one who would fight tooth and nail to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. I'm ready for whatever you've got, I replied, locking eyes with her. But don't forget, you're the one who started this. She didn't respond. She just stared at me, her eyes hard, before turning and walking out of the room. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading into silence. Mike let out a long breath, shaking his head. Man, she's ruthless. You sure you're ready for this? I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder, feeling the weight of everything. My past with her, the fight ahead, settling on me. But instead of feeling crushed by it, I felt steady. I have to be, I said quietly. I'm not giving her an inch. She's going to feel every bit of this. Mike clapped me on the shoulder. All right then, let's get this done. We moved my things to the guest room, setting up a temporary space for me to stay while we worked through the logistics of the divorce. The house felt like a battlefield now, each room charged with tension, every sound amplifying the hostility between us. But I wasn't going anywhere, not until I had secured everything I needed. After we finished, Mike headed out, giving me one last nod of support before leaving me to face the house, and Jessica, alone. I stood in the guest room for a while, staring at the walls, thinking about what came next. This was just the beginning. Jessica wasn't going to go down without a fight. She'd already made that clear. But neither was I. As I lay down on the unfamiliar bed, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had spent so long living in uncertainty, in the shadows of her lies, but now I could see everything clearly. The war had started, and I wasn't going to lose. And no matter what Jessica threw at me, I was ready. The days that followed were like living in the eye of a storm. The house felt wrong, filled with this unbearable tension, like everything could snap at any moment. I stayed in the guest room, avoiding Jessica as much as possible. We moved around the house like strangers, passing each other in silence, barely making eye contact. It was as if every corner of the place held the weight of 1,000 unsaid words, 1,000 broken promises. But the real battle was happening behind the scenes. I had met with Ben, my lawyer, again, and we had laid out the plan. I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make sure I didn't lose the house, my financial stability, everything I'd worked for. This wasn't going to be a quick and clean divorce. Jessica wanted war? She'd get it. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just me who was going to suffer from this. There was something Jessica hadn't considered, or maybe she had, but either way, the collateral damage was going to spread wider than just the two of us. I hadn't spoken to my parents yet. They adored Jessica. They had from the very beginning. For years, they'd seen her as the perfect daughter-in-law, always polite, always so put together. What would they say when they found out what she'd done? Would they even believe me? I dialed my mom's number with a heavy feeling in my chest. The line rang a few times before she picked up, her warm voice instantly filling the silence. Tom, it's good to hear from you, honey. How are you? I hesitated for a second, the words stuck in my throat. How was I supposed to tell her? How was I supposed to explain everything without unraveling myself in the process? Mom, there's something I need to talk to you about. I started, my voice shaky despite my best efforts. It's about Jessica. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her mind shifting gears. Is everything all right, Tom? You sound off. I took a deep breath. No, Mom, it's not all right. I swallowed hard. Jessica's been cheating on me. For a while, I think. I found out a few days ago. Silence. It stretched out for so long I thought maybe the call had dropped. But then I heard her let out a soft, shaky breath. Oh, Tom, I don't know what to say. Are you sure? Are you really sure? I'm sure, I said, my voice flat. I've seen the messages. I've seen everything. There was another pause, and then she spoke again, her voice softer now, but tinged with something sharp. I just can't believe it. She always seemed so devoted to you. Are you okay? What are you going to do? I've already filed for divorce, I replied, the words feeling both empowering and painful. There's no going back from this. She's not the person I thought she was, and I'm not going to let her get away with it. My mom was quiet for a moment. Then she let out a sigh, one that sounded heavy with disappointment and sadness. I'm so sorry, honey. I know how much you loved her. I'm so sorry. Me too, Mom. Me too. After hanging up, I felt an odd mix of relief and exhaustion. Telling my mom was the first step in ripping away the illusion that had surrounded Jessica for so long. She had fooled not just me, but everyone around us, and now the truth was going to come crashing down. Later that day, I sat in the guest room, staring at my phone. There was one more conversation I couldn't avoid. Jessica's family had always been close to mine, especially her brother, Kyle. He'd become a good friend of mine over the years, and despite everything, I felt like he deserved to know what was going on. I hesitated for a long time before finally texting him. Me. Hey Kyle, I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we meet up? The reply came quickly. Kyle, of course, man. What's going on? Is everything okay with you and Jess? I stared at the message for a moment, feeling the familiar wave of bitterness rise up. He had no idea what kind of person his sister really was. Me, it's complicated. I'll explain when we meet. We agreed to meet at a bar that evening, a neutral place where I could say what needed to be said. As I drove there, my mind raced with everything that had happened over the past few days. Part of me dreaded this conversation. Kyle wasn't just Jessica's brother. He was someone I'd come to trust, but I couldn't lie to him. He deserved the truth no matter how ugly it was. When I walked into the bar, Kyle was already sitting at a table, a beer in front of him. He waved me over, his usual friendly grin plastered on his face. But as soon as I sat down, he seemed to sense that something was wrong. His smile faded, replaced by concern. Tom, what's going on? You look like you've been through hell. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right way to say it. Kyle, there's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to come out with it. I took a deep breath. Jessica's been cheating on me. For a while. His eyes widened, the shock clear on his face. What? No, that can't be right. Jess wouldn't do that. You must be mistaken. I'm not. I interrupted, my voice firmer than I felt. I caught her. I saw the messages, the photos. It's real, Kyle. He shook his head slowly, his mind clearly racing, trying to process what I just told him. I don't know what to say, man. I never saw this coming. Jess. She's my sister, but she always seems so committed to you. Are you sure there's no way to fix this? I looked him dead in the eyes. There's no fixing this. I've already filed for divorce. It's over. Kyle leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Damn. I don't know what to say. I'm sorry, man. I know this has to be killing you. It is. I admitted, my voice raw. But there's no going back now. I just wanted you to hear it from me. Not from her or anyone else. He nodded, his face hardening with a mix of sadness and anger. I appreciate that. I'll talk to her. But honestly, I don't even know what to say to her right now. We sat in silence for a while after that, sipping our drinks, the weight of the conversation hanging between us like a cloud. It wasn't just my marriage that was falling apart. Jessica's actions had ripples that were spreading through everything, pulling others into the mess she'd created. As I left the bar that night, I felt the full gravity of what was happening. This wasn't just about me and her anymore. It was about the people around us, the people we'd built relationships with over the years. They were all going to feel the fallout. But that wasn't on me. Jessica had made her choices, And now we all had to live with the consequences. When I got back to the house, it was dark and quiet. Jessica was in the bedroom, the door closed, and for once, I was glad for the silence. I sat down on the couch, staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets, thinking about everything I had lost, and everything I still had to fight for. This war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I was ready for whatever came next. The days passed in a blur, each one filled with tension, silence, and the weight of everything that had been shattered. Jessica and I barely spoke. When we did, it was sharp, quick exchanges, cold and empty, like there was nothing left between us but business. The house felt like a war zone, both of us occupying separate corners, waiting for the other to make a move. I was counting down the days until I could finally leave for good, but I wasn't going to give her any advantage by walking out before the legal dust settled. She tried a few times to pull me back in, using that same manipulative charm she'd perfected over the years. I could see it in her eyes, the calculation behind every word, the careful tones of remorse she wove into her apologies. She'd catch me in the hallway, blocking my path with wide, tear-filled eyes. "Tom, please," she would whisper, voice trembling in just the right way to stir pity. "I made a mistake. We can still fix this. You don't have to do this. We've been through so much together." But I wasn't falling for it. Not anymore. Every time she tried to lure me back, I just saw the messages with Matt flashing in my mind. The laughter, the lies, her voice on the phone, mocking me behind my back, acting like I was too weak to walk away from her. The woman who stood in front of me, begging for forgiveness, wasn't the one I'd married. Maybe she never had been. "Don't bother, Jess," I would say, brushing past her. "We're done." I knew what she was really doing. She was setting the stage, trying to make herself look like the victim, trying to twist the narrative for when this all blew up in court. She wanted to paint herself as the regretful wife, the one who had made a single, forgivable mistake, while I was the cold-hearted man who had torn everything apart. But it wasn't going to work. I had the evidence. I had the truth. The day finally came when the divorce papers arrived. I had been expecting them, but when the courier handed me the envelope, there was still a moment of hesitation. This was it, the final blow, the end of everything we had built together. I didn't feel sadness or regret anymore. I just felt empty. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table, the papers sliding out with an almost theatrical weight. The formal language, the sterile tone of it all, made the reality even clearer. The life we had shared had been reduced to a few sheets of paper, signatures, and legal jargon. I sat there for a while, just staring at the pages. Jessica was in the living room, pretending to read a magazine, though I knew she was watching me from the corner of her eye. She hadn't said a word since the papers arrived. She didn't have to. The silence between us said everything. I could hear her shifting in her seat, waiting for me to say something, to react. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. This wasn't her moment anymore. It was mine. I grabbed a pen and flipped to the signature page. With one swift motion, I signed my name, the ink bleeding into the paper like the final nail in the coffin. I didn't feel relief, not yet, but there was a sense of finality in the air, like I had just closed a chapter of my life that had been dragging on for far too long. I stood up, the papers in my hand, and walked into the living room. Jessica looked up at me, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of weakness, any opening she could exploit. I handed her the papers without a word. She took them, her hands trembling slightly. "You really want this?" she asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and something that sounded almost like panic. "You really want to end it like this?" I looked down at her, feeling nothing but the cold, hard truth of what we had become. "It's already over, Jess. This is just the paperwork." Her face twisted, anger flaring up behind the tears that were threatening to fall. "You're making a mistake, Tom. You'll regret this. You're throwing away everything." I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Jessica. You threw everything away. You made your choice. Now you have to live with it." Her face flushed, her eyes narrowing. "You think you're so righteous? So above it all? Fine. But don't think this is going to be easy for you. I'll fight you every step of the way. You want to play hardball? Let's play." I could feel the venom in her words, the bitterness that had been bubbling under the surface finally spilling over. This wasn't about saving the marriage anymore. It was about power, control. She wasn't going to let me walk away without a fight. But I was ready. "I'm not afraid of you, Jess," I said calmly, my voice steady. "I've been preparing for this, and I'm not backing down. You can try to make this as messy as you want, but it won't change the fact that it's over." Her lips curled into a sneer. "We'll see about that." She turned away, gripping the papers in her hand like a weapon, storming out of the room without another word. I watched her go, feeling the tension drain from the house with every step she took. It was over, for real this time. The rest of the day passed in a haze of quiet, the house unnaturally still. I didn't see Jessica again. She stayed in the bedroom, probably plotting her next move, but I didn't care. My part in this was done. I had played the game, and now it was time to leave the board. That night, I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the city outside filling the silence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of peace creeping in. It wasn't happiness or relief, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, the beginning of freedom. I didn't know what the future held. I knew the divorce proceedings would get ugly. Jessica would make sure of that. She'd drag it out, try to take as much as she could. But it didn't matter. I was done being afraid of what she could do. I was done playing by her rules. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. As I closed my eyes, the weight of everything finally lifting off my shoulders, I knew one thing for certain. This was the end of her control over me, and the start of something better. The last battle had been fought. Now it was time to rebuild, on my own terms,